Andrei Chikatilo was a Soviet serial killer. I'm going to begin by reading his victims and what happened to them, and then go backwards. This is from the Criminal Minds Wiki, and what you're about to hear is very, very disturbing. To begin with, on an unspecified date in 1954 was an unnamed girl who was 11, who was assaulted by tackling and wrestling her. In 64, there was a 16-year-old girl who was groped only, and an unnamed girl who was sexually assaulted. In 78 was Yelena 9. That was one of them that almost got him captured. He intended to rape, but stabbed her 3 times in the abdomen instead when he couldn't get an erection. Then came Larissa, who was 17. He strangled her. Her mouth was filled with dirt to muffle her, eviscerated with a stick. Her genitals were removed, and one of her nipples was bitten off and swallowed. In 1982, there was Lyubov, who was 12. They were stabbed and slashed 22 times in the head, neck, chest, and genitals, engaged in necrophilia with her corpse, and removed her eyes post-mortem. A month later, Lyubov, who was 14, her body was found in August. About 2 weeks later was Oleg, who was 9. He removed his genitals post-mortem and took them. The body was never found. 3 days later was Olga, who was 16. He removed her heart post-mortem and took it. Her body was found in October. About 3 weeks later was Irina, who was 18. Her body was found 12 days later. A week later was Sergei, who was 15. Then he took a hiatus. In December 11th, Olga, who was 10, he stabbed over 50 times, ripped her chest open, and removed her lower bowel and uterus post-mortem. In 1983, in June, was Laura, who was 15. Possibly her body was never found. In July was Irina, who was 12, and Ludmila, who was 24. August 9th was Igor, who was 7. Somewhere in summer was an identified woman who was 18 to 25. Sometime after September was Valentina. Her body was found in November. October 27th was Vera, who was 19. He removed her breast post-mortem. Her body was found 3 days later. And in December was Sergei, who was 14, was stabbed over 70 times, removed his genitals, eviscerated post-mortem, and his body was found 8 days later. In 1984 was Natalia. She was 17, stabbed 28 times. Her nose, upper lip, and finger on her left hand were cut off post-mortem. February was Martia, who was 44. In March was Dmitry, who was 10, stabbed 54 times, bit off their tongue and penis. May 25th was Tatiana, who was 29, killed with a knife and a hammer. Svetlana, who was 10, incidentally the daughter, killed with a knife and a hammer when she saw Chikatilo killing her mother, and was decapitated post-mortem. In June was Yelena, who was 21. July was Anna, who was 19, stabbed and removed her uterus post-mortem. July was another Svetlana, who was 20, who was stabbed. In August 2nd was Natalia, who was 16 and was stabbed. August 7th was Ludmila, 17, slashed 39 times. August 8th, so he killed like 5 people in August. August 8th, an identified woman who was decapitated post-mortem. August 13th was an Akmarul, who was 10 and stabbed. August 28th was an 11-year-old Alexander, who was strangled, castrated, and removed his eyes post-mortem. And September 6th was Irina, who was 24, who was stabbed. In 1985 was Natalia, who was 18, stabbed 38 times and strangled. Her body was found 3 days later. Then came Irina at the end of the month, who was 18. He sliced her open from her neck to her genitals, removed one of her breasts and both of her eyes post-mortem. In 1987, he killed a couple of 12-year-olds. One of them, with the stomach was ripped open, his mouth was tipped with mud to muffle him. And in September was Yuri, who was 16. In 1988, there was an identified woman. Then there was a 9-year-old who was sodomized, stabbed, castrated, eviscerated, and stuffed with his orifices with dirt. And then came a 15-year-old where they cut off his genitals post-mortem, stole his pocket watch. In 1989, there was a 16-year-old who was stabbed in the mouth and dismembered post-mortem. An 8-year-old whose body was found about 2 months later, a 10-year-old. A 19-year-old, he cut off her breasts and uterus and slashed her face post-mortem. And 2 weeks later was a 10-year-old. He bit off his tongue, cut off his genitals, buried him alive, and left him for dead. In 1990 came Andre, who was 11. He stabbed to death and castrated him post-mortem. A 10-year-old where he cut off the tip of his tongue, fatally stabbed, eviscerated, and castrated post-mortem. A 31-year-old whose body was found later. A 13-year-old. An 11-year-old who was stabbed 42 times and castrated while alive. A 16-year-old who they cut off the tip of their tongue, fatally stabbed and castrated post-mortem. A 16-year-old. A 22-year-old stabbed in the stomach, tongue and genitals were cut off, post-mortem and eaten. Her body was found a week later. He also confessed to 4 additional killings, including the murder of Irina, who he remains is the prime suspect of, though he denied killing her. He was also accused of child molestation several times when he was a school teacher. Now, he was so out of control that for his own safety, they actually put him in an iron cage when he was on the stand to protect him. His behavior during the proceedings was bizarre. Twice he pulled down his pants, exposed himself, shouted he was not gay, claimed to be pregnant, lactating at some points, and alternated between boredom and anger. He denied being guilty of several murders, to which he already confessed, to unknown ones. Then the prosecutor was going to deliver the final argument. He broke into song and had to be removed from the courtroom. When he was brought in and offered a moment to speak, he said nothing. And though the defense tried to claim he was insane, the psychiatrist disagreed. He was found guilty of 52 murders, 21 males, 31 females. On Valentine's Day of 1994, he was executed with a single shot to the head, and his last words apparently being, "Don't blow my brains out, the Japanese want to buy them." He was in his upper 50s at the time.